Today we are heading deep into the rural heartlands of India to discuss an entity that has existed in folklore for thousands of years. We aren't talking about a typical ghost or a vengeful spirit. We are talking about the Vitala. In the West, you might call it a ghoul, but in India, it is something much more intelligent and much more dangerous. These are spirits that inhabit corpses hanging upside down from trees in cremation grounds, waiting to latch onto a host. They don't just want to scare you, they want to break your mind with riddles and impossible knowledge. There is a saying in the Konkan region that if you hear your name called from the trees near a burning ghat, you must never look up, and you certainly must never answer. One of the stories I have for you today involves a man who thought these were just stories to scare children until he felt the physical weight of the dead on his shoulders. Make sure you stay until the very end of the video, because I'm going to break down the deep cultural history behind the Vitala and why people in these villages still refuse to walk under banyan trees at night. Our first story comes from a viewer named Rohan, who worked as a surveyor for a construction firm in Maharashtra. It was late October, just after the monsoons had cleared, leaving the air thick and humid. Rohan had been sent to a remote village near the Western Ghats to map out land for a proposed resort. The land was beautiful, lush, and green, but it bordered an old, neglected cremation ground that the locals had stopped using decades ago. Rohan was a city boy from Mumbai. He didn't care about village superstitions. He was there to do a job. The headman of the village, a wrinkled man with red betel nut-stained teeth, warned Rohan specifically about a massive banyan tree that sat right on the property line. He told Rohan that the tree was the home of a Vitala, a guardian of the spirits, and that no machinery should touch it, and no one should be near it after sunset. Rohan nodded politely, but privately dismissed it as nonsense. He spent 3 days surveying without incident. On the 4th day, he fell behind schedule. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. His team had already packed up and left for the lodge, but Rohan wanted to finish marking the perimeter near the old cremation ground. As twilight turned to true darkness, the atmosphere shifted. The sounds of the jungle, the crickets, the frogs, suddenly went dead silent. It was as if a heavy blanket had been thrown over the world. Rohan adjusted his headlamp and focused on his theodolite. That was when he heard the sound. It sounded like dry leaves crunching, but rhythmically. Crunch and drag, crunch and drag. Rohan swung his light toward the banyan tree. The aerial roots of the tree hung down like thick, matted hair, swaying slightly even though there was no wind. He called out, asking if one of the villagers was there. No answer. He turned back to his equipment, and then he heard a giggle. It wasn't a child's giggle. It was dry, raspy, like sandpaper rubbing together. It came from above him. Against his better judgment, Rohan looked up. High up in the branches, amidst the dense canopy, something was hanging upside down. It looked like a bundle of rags at first, but as his light focused, he saw human limbs. It was a body, desiccated and gray, hanging by its ankles. Its arms were crossed over its chest. Rohan froze. He thought it was a dead body, perhaps a suicide. But then the thing's eyes snapped open. They weren't white or red. They were entirely black, reflecting the beam of his headlamp. The head twisted around a full 180 degrees to face him, defying all anatomy. The thing spoke. It didn't shout. It whispered, yet the voice sounded like it was coming from right next to Rohan's ear. It said, "I know what you did in Pune, Rohan. I know why you left." Rohan's blood ran cold. He had left his previous job in Pune because of a massive error he had covered up, an error that had cost the company millions. No one knew that. Not his boss, not his wife. Only he knew. The Vitala dropped from the branch. It didn't hit the ground with a thud. It landed silently on all fours, like a spider. It began to scuttle toward him, moving with jerky, unnatural speed. Rohan dropped his equipment and ran. He sprinted through the undergrowth, the thorns tearing at his clothes. He could hear the scuttling behind him, getting closer. Then he felt a weight. It wasn't a hand grabbing him. It felt as if someone had jumped onto his back, piggyback style. An immense, crushing weight pressed down on his shoulders, forcing him to his knees. The hot, rotting breath washed over his neck. The voice whispered again, "Answer me." This, Rohan. If a man builds a house on lies and the house falls, who is the murderer? The builder or the earth? Rohan screamed and scrambled up, adrenaline powering him forward despite the invisible weight. He burst out of the tree line and onto the main village road where the streetlights were. As soon as the electric light hit him, the weight vanished. He collapsed on the road, gasping. The villagers found him there. When he looked in the mirror later that night at the lodge, he saw bruises on his shoulders. They were shaped like long, thin fingers. Rohan quit his job the next day. He says he still feels the weight sometimes, usually when he's alone in the dark, and he wonders if the Vitala ever really got off his back. The second story takes us south to the backwaters of Kerala, involving a family returning for a funeral. Anjali and her husband, Dev, were driving back to her ancestral home. Her grandfather had passed away at the ripe old age of 90. It was a somber occasion, but also a reunion. The family home was a sprawling traditional house with a central courtyard surrounded by coconut groves. In Kerala, the rituals surrounding death are strict. The body is kept in the main hall, oriented in a specific direction, with oil lamps lit around it. The belief is that the soul lingers for a while before moving on. They arrived late at night. The house was full of weeping relatives. The body of the grandfather lay on a mat, covered in a white cloth, his toes tied together. Anjali paid her respects and then went to the kitchen to help make tea for the guests. Around 2 a.m., the house quieted down. Most relatives were sleeping on mats in the corridors. Only Anjali and her cousin, Mahesh, were awake, sitting on the veranda keeping the vigil. The body was just inside the open doors of the main hall, visible from where they sat. Mahesh was smoking a cigarette, flicking the ash into the garden. He started talking about the property division, complaining that the grandfather hadn't left a clear will. He spoke ill of the dead man, calling him stingy and stubborn. Anjali told him to hush, that it was bad luck to speak ill of the dead while the body was still in the house. Mahesh laughed. He said, "He's gone, Anjali. It's just meat now." At that exact moment, the oil lamp near the grandfather's head flickered violently, almost going out. A sudden gust of wind swept through the courtyard, smelling of sulfur and wet earth. Anjali looked toward the body. She saw the white cloth over the chest rise and fall. She rubbed her eyes, thinking it was a trick of the light. But then she saw it again. A deep, heaving breath. She grabbed Mahesh's arm. "Look," she whispered. Mahesh squinted. He stood up and walked into the hole. He approached the body and reached out to pull the cloth back. As his hand touched the fabric, the grandfather's hand shot out and gripped Mahesh's wrist. The grip was bone-crushing. Mahesh screamed, dropping his cigarette. The corpse sat up stiff as a board without bending its back. The cloth fell away. The grandfather's face was contorted into a grin that was too wide, stretching the skin until it tore at the corners of the mouth. This wasn't the grandfather. The eyes were rolled back, showing only whites, and the tongue lolled out, black and swollen. The thing that was wearing the grandfather's body spoke, but it wasn't the old man's frail voice. It was a chorus of voices, overlapping and dissonant. "You want the land, Mahesh?" it hissed. "You want the soil? Take it." The entity yanked Mahesh forward. Anjali watched in horror as Mahesh was thrown across the room with superhuman force, slamming into the heavy teak pillar. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The corpse then turned its head slowly toward Anjali. It didn't attack. It just held a finger to its lips in a shushing motion and then slowly, deliberately, lay back down. The rigor mortis seemed to return instantly. The commotion woke the house. When the elders came running, they found Mahesh with a broken collarbone and the grandfather's body lying exactly as it had been. But Anjali noticed something that others missed. The toes, which had been tied together with twine, were now snapped free. The local priest was called immediately. He took one look at the body and ordered the cremation to be done at first light, skipping the usual waiting period. He performed a binding ritual around the pyre. He told the family that a Vetala had tried to claim the vessel because of the disrespect shown in its presence. Mahesh survived, but he never spoke again. He sits in a care home now, staring at the wall, terrified of falling asleep. Our final story comes from the dense forests of Odisha, involving a group of friends on a trekking trip that went horribly wrong. 3 friends, Kabir, Samir, and Isha, decided to explore a lesser-known trail that cut through a reserve forest. The locals called this area the Zone of Silence. Legend had it that a powerful sorcerer had once bound many Vitalas to the trees here to guard his treasure, and even after his death, the spirits remained. They were experienced hikers carrying GPS and satellite phones. They planned to camp in a clearing about 10 miles in. The hike was grueling. By the time they reached the clearing, the sun was setting. They set up their tents and built a fire. As they sat around the fire eating dinner, the woods around them began to feel oppressive. Samir, the joker of the group, started making ghost noises to scare Aisha. He picked up a stone and threw it into the darkness, aiming for a hollow tree trunk nearby. The stone hit with a hollow thud. Immediately, a voice called out from the darkness. "Thank you." The 3 friends froze. It was a human voice, clear and polite. "Who's there?" Kabir shouted, grabbing a flashlight. A man stepped into the ring of firelight. He was wearing tattered clothes that looked like they were from a different era, an old dhoti and a shawl. He looked incredibly pale, his skin almost translucent. He smiled at them. "I have been stuck in that tree for a long time," he said. The stone broke the seal. Aisha, sensing something was wrong, reached for her backpack where she kept a knife. The man's eyes darted to her hand. "You don't need that, little sister," he said. "I just want to warm myself." He sat by the fire. He didn't blink, not once. He started asking them questions, personal questions. He asked Kabir about his mother's illness. He asked Samir about the money he stole from his brother. He asked Aisha about the child she had never told anyone about. The friends were terrified. How could this stranger know these things? The man laughed. "The dead see everything," he said. He looked at Samir. "You threw the stone. You owe me a life?" Samir stood up to run, but his legs gave out. He fell to the ground, paralyzed. The man stood up, and as he did, his form began to stretch. He grew taller, his limbs elongating, his jaw unhinging. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a shadow, a silhouette of darkness against the firelight. "I am the riddle, and I am the answer," the entity boomed. Kabir and Aisha grabbed Samir and dragged him toward the tents, but the fire suddenly roared upwards, turning green. The entity lunged not at them, but into Samir. Samir convulsed violently, his back arching, and then he went limp. A moment later, Samir stood up. He looked at his friends. His face was slack, his expression empty. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was flat. "Let's go to sleep." Kabir and Isha were too terrified to argue. They stayed awake all night watching Samir. He sat upright in his tent, staring at the zipper, not moving a muscle for 6 hours. At dawn, they packed up and hiked out in record time. Samir walked with a strange, stiff gait. He didn't speak the whole way back. When they got back to the city, Samir changed. He became a recluse. He stopped eating cooked food, preferring raw meat. He eventually disappeared into the forests of Odisha a year later, leaving a note that said, "The tree is calling me home." Kabir and Aisha never saw him again. They believed that Samir died in that clearing, and something else walked back to the city with them. So what is actually going on here? The Vatala, or Baital, is a staple of Hindu mythology. Unlike the Western zombie, which is a mindless, reanimated corpse, the Vatala is a celestial being or a spirit that occupies a corpse to interact with the living. They are tricksters, guardians, and keepers of knowledge. The most famous legend is the Baital Pachisi, where King Vikramaditya must carry a Vatala on his back. The Vatala tells him a story and ends it with a riddle. If the king knows the answer and doesn't speak, his head will burst. If he speaks, the Vatala flies back to the tree. This lore explains the weight on the back in the first story and the obsession with riddles and secrets. Culturally, these stories serve as warnings to respect the dead and the spaces they inhabit, specifically cremation grounds and ancient trees like the Banyan and Peepal, which are seen as gateways between worlds. From a rational perspective, many of these encounters can be explained by environmental factors. Cremation grounds are often located in isolated, high-stress environments. The weight on the back is a common symptom of extreme anxiety or sleep paralysis. The banyan tree, with its complex root system, releases large amounts of carbon dioxide at night, which can cause hallucinations, dizziness, and a feeling of suffocation if one sleeps or lingers under it. As for this moving corpse, the heat of a fire or the natural decomposition process can cause muscles to contract, making a dead body sit up or twitch, a phenomenon known as the Lazarus sign, which would be terrifying to witness in a dimly lit house. But knowing the science doesn't make it any less scary when you are alone in the dark and hear a branch snap above you. What do you think happened to Samir? Was he possessed, or did he just lose his mind from fear? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true ghost stories from across Asia.